In the far corner of the galaxy, there was a small orphan facility on a cold, lonely planet called Draxus 7. Inside that gray metal building, full of broken furniture and flickering lights, lived a tiny alien girl named Silka. She was smaller than the others, with soft blue skin, glowing silver eyes, and a quiet voice no one ever cared to hear. Silka had lived in the facility since she was a baby. She didn't know who her parents were or where she came from. All she knew was the cold floors, the tasteless food, and the long nights where no one said her name. Other alien children in the orphanage got visits from traders, buyers, or sponsors. Some of them were lucky enough to get adopted by alien families or sent to work on better planets. But Silka was always left behind. Too small, too quiet, too forgettable. "She looks like a sick bug," one kid once said, and the others laughed. What hurt her the most wasn't the teasing or the silence. It was something else. Every time she saw a video from Earth, she saw something strange. Birthdays. Humans would gather around a small cake, sing songs, give gifts, and smile like they were full of love. Children laughed, their eyes full of light. And always, there was a candle on the cake, glowing in the darkness. Silka didn't understand it fully, but she knew one thing. No one had ever celebrated her. No birthday, no gift, not even a kind word. She once asked an older caretaker if she had a birthday. The caretaker snorted. "You were dumped here during a sandstorm. We didn't bother checking the date." Silka never asked again. That night, she sat on the rooftop of the building. A thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Above her, the stars blinked gently, as if they were listening. She whispered to them, "If someone ever celebrates me, I'll believe I exist." Far below, in the docking bay, a shuttle landed. A new worker had arrived from Earth. His name was Jonah. He had kind brown eyes, worn boots, and a bag full of supplies. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. Just a few months of help work at the alien orphanage, then back to Earth. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Jonah walked through the halls, holding a scanner and a clipboard. Most children ignored him, some stared, and a few even tried to impress him. But in the far back corner of the room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was Silka. She wasn't doing anything special, just sitting with her hands in her lap, staring quietly at the wall. But Jonah's eyes paused on her. There was something in her silence, something heavy, like she had stopped hoping a long time ago. He made a note on his pad. Subject 47. Emotionally withdrawn. Later that day, he saw her again, standing alone in the food line. No one talked to her. No one stood beside her. She didn't even look up when her tray was handed to her. Jonah watched her sit in the corner, eat slowly, then quietly walk away. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing those silver eyes, full of silence. Not sadness, not anger. Just nothing. The next day he tried to talk to her. "Hey!" he said softly, kneeling near her spot in the common room. She looked up slowly, not scared, just tired. "I'm Jonah," he said, smiling. "What's your name?" She didn't speak for a long moment, then whispered, "Silka." "That's a beautiful name," Jonah said. No one had ever said that to her before. She blinked, surprised, but didn't answer. Jonah didn't push. He just smiled and stood up. "Nice to meet you, Silka," and walked away. That night, Silka sat on the roof again, but her thoughts were different. A human had smiled at her. He had said her name was beautiful. That tiny moment felt like the warmest thing she had ever known. She reached under her blanket and pulled out a small broken button she'd found weeks ago. It was nothing, really, but she held it tightly like a treasure, and whispered again, this time with a little more hope. "Maybe one day, someone will celebrate me." Downstairs, Jonah stared at a glowing photo of a cupcake on his tablet. With a candle, he tapped the screen and whispered, Everyone deserves a birthday, even her. The next morning, Silka sat in her usual spot by the window. Her hands rested on her lap, her eyes watching the dusty yard outside. The other children laughed and ran, but no one called her to join. She didn't expect them to. She had learned long ago that being invisible was safer. But then, something unusual happened. Jonah sat down beside her. Not too close, just enough for her to notice. He didn't speak right away, just sat with her in silence. That made her more nervous than if he had shouted. She slowly looked at him, confused. Humans didn't usually sit with her. Actually, no one did. Jonah looked at the sky and said softly, "You know, the clouds here look different than on Earth." Silka blinked, unsure what to say. "They move slower," he added, smiling a little. "Like they're thinking before going somewhere." She looked up, then looked at him again. She didn't understand why he was talking like that. Calm and soft. He turned to her. "Do you ever wish you could float with them?" Silka stared at him like he had spoken in a strange language. After a pause, she whispered, "Clouds don't carry people." Jonah chuckled gently. "Maybe not, but I think they carry wishes." That word, wishes, stayed in her head even after he left. She didn't know what to do with it. No one had ever asked her to wish for anything before. Later that day, Jonah walked past the storage hall and stopped. He peeked through the half-open door and saw Silka sitting with her knees pulled to her chest. She was humming quietly to herself. A broken, soft sound. Jonah stepped back quietly, not wanting to disturb her. But he made a decision that very moment. He would give her something she had never had. At the market in the nearby port station, Jonah searched carefully. He bought a small candle, a cupcake from a food stall, and a tiny music box shaped like a star. He spent all his weekly credits, but he didn't care. He had a plan. The next day, Jonah approached the orphanage kitchen staff. "Can I use the break room for a short while tomorrow evening?" he asked politely. They raised eyebrows. "Why?" Jonah replied. "I want to do something kind for one of the children." They laughed. "You'll regret that." Jonah didn't answer, he just smiled. Meanwhile, Silka sat in the corner of the sleeping area, patching her torn blanket with a bent needle. She heard the other orphans whispering. "The human's acting strange," one said. "Probably wants to impress the supervisors," said another. Silka didn't respond, but her heart beat faster. A part of her wished the whispers were about her. Another part warned her. Don't hope. That night, as the sky turned orange outside, Jonah walked past Silka and stopped. He crouched beside her again and placed a tiny flower made of paper in her hand. "It's not much," he said, "but it won't die." Silka stared at the flower for a long time. "Why?" she finally asked. "Because," Jonah said gently, "you're not invisible to me." Then he stood up and walked away, leaving her speechless. Silka looked at the flower in her palm, the folded petals soft but firm. No one had ever given her a gift before. She didn't know whether to hide it or hold it high, so she just held it close to her chest and sat still for a long time. The next morning, Jonah met a supply worker and gave him a message chip. It said, "Today is Silka's birthday." The worker looked confused. "Is it really her birthday?" Jonah replied, "It is now." That afternoon, Jonah decorated the break room with what little he had. A clean table, a small light, a candle, and one simple cupcake. He placed the music box in the center, wound it once, and let the soft tune play. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of love. He walked down the hall and found Silka near the window again. He reached out a hand. "Will you come with me?" She stared at him, heart racing, unsure, but something in his eyes told her it was okay. So she stood and followed. As she stepped into the break room, the lights dimmed, and the tiny candle flickered softly. Silka froze, eyes wide. Jonah stepped beside her and said with a warm smile, "Happy birthday, Silka." Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Her eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from something she couldn't name. Something warm, and soft, and beautiful. No one had ever said those words to her. No one had ever remembered her. Yet here stood a human, with a candle and a cupcake, and the first smile she had ever seen meant just for her. The next day, the break room felt like a dream that Silka wasn't sure really happened. She woke up with the paper flower still tucked under her pillow, and the soft music of the star-shaped box echoing in her mind. It had been real. Someone had celebrated her. She walked through the hall slower than usual. Her head was still down, but something inside her had changed. A tiny spark had lit up inside her chest, and she didn't want to lose it. Other children stared at her as she passed. One boy whispered, "Why did the human throw her a party?" Another girl sneered, "He probably felt sorry for her." But one small child looked up at Silka and smiled just a little. Silka blinked in surprise, then kept walking, confused but not sad. Jonah, on the other hand, was deep in thought. He sat in the storage room, typing notes on his tablet while replaying the birthday moment in his head. The look in Silka's eyes, that raw shock and fragile joy, had shaken something inside him. He opened a secure message channel and sent a report to Earth Command. It said, "Child shows signs of trauma due to emotional neglect. Recommend emotional support programs for orphan facilities." He paused, then added, "Also, birthday celebrations should be encouraged." One candle changed everything. Later, Jonah walked into the administrator's office and stood before Director Malvek. The tall insectoid alien didn't look up from his files. "What do you want, human?" he asked flatly. "I want to start something," Jonah said. "A weekly moment of kindness." Malvek scoffed. "This isn't Earth. We don't waste time on emotions here." Jonah kept calm. "Then I'll do it off duty, just with whoever wants to join." Malvek waved a hand. "Do what you want, just don't ask for funding." Jonah left the office with a grin. He didn't need credits, he just needed courage. He visited the market again that evening, bought more candles, a few second-hand toys, and a small pack of glow stones. Each item cost more than he could afford, but he didn't care. In his heart, he had made a promise. Silka would never feel invisible again. Meanwhile, in the dorm hall, the whispers grew louder. Children gathered near the walls, watching Silka as she sat holding the music box. "She's got the human wrapped around her fingers," someone muttered. "Maybe if we cry too, we'll get cupcakes," said another. But one boy, Zarn, walked up to Silka and asked, "What was it like?" She looked at him carefully, unsure how to answer. He added, "Was it real?" Silka nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "He said it was my birthday." Zarn frowned. "But you don't even have a birth date." "I do now," she replied softly, and her lips curved just a little. A small, quiet smile. Jonah noticed the change. The next day, he found Silka helping a younger child reach the water spout. She didn't speak much, but she stood with the girl until her cup was full. Jonah smiled from a distance. Then he gathered a few children during free hour and placed a candle in the center of the table. He asked, "Anyone want to celebrate something small today?" The children looked at him strangely, but one finally said, "I found a shiny rock." Jonah smiled and lit the candle. "Then let's celebrate that." Each child shared one small happy thing, and they took turns blowing out the candle. It was silly, it was strange, but it was warm. Later that night, Silka peeked through the doorway and saw the last of the candle glow. She stood quietly, watching. Jonah saw her and nodded gently. He didn't call her in. He just smiled, letting her know she was always welcome. Back in her room, Silka held the paper flower and whispered to it, "Why does kindness feel like flying?" Elsewhere in the facility, Director Malvek stared at the security feed. He frowned at the footage of children laughing around a candle. He muttered, "This isn't regulation." But then he paused, noticing Silka walking a younger child to bed. For a moment, his antennae twitched. Not in anger, but in thought. The next day, Jonah received a surprise. A note slipped under his door. It read, "Permission granted to use the education room for your human customs. For now." There was no signature, but he knew where it came from. That evening, Jonah passed Silka and gave her a folded paper box. She opened it slowly and found a tiny candle. "I already had one," she said softly. Jonah replied, "Now you have two, one to remember, one to give away." Silka looked at him, and for the first time, her smile reached her eyes. The education room had never felt warm before. It was just another gray, lifeless place with empty chairs and dull walls. But tonight, something was different. Jonah arrived early, carrying a small bag filled with treasures. Paper stars, glue sticks, glowing stones, and 3 fresh candles. He placed everything on the center table, humming quietly as he worked. There was no cake this time, no decorations from Earth, but there was heart, and that was enough. One by one, a few curious children peeked in. At first, they only watched from the doorway. Then a brave little boy stepped inside and asked, "Can I help?" Jonah smiled and handed him a paper star. "Fold this like this," he said, guiding the boy's hands. Soon, more children entered. Some came out of curiosity, others because they didn't want to be left out. Jonah didn't care why, he was just glad they were there. In the hallway, Silka stood alone, watching the lights flicker under the door. She held the tiny candle Jonah gave her the day before. Her heart beat fast. Part of her wanted to go inside, but another part whispered, "Don't ruin it, they'll laugh again." She turned to walk away, but then stopped. From behind her, a small voice said, "Are you going in?" Silka turned and saw the younger girl she helped at the water spout. The child smiled and held Silka's hand. "Let's go together," she said. And just like that, the fear faded a little. Inside, Jonah lit one candle and dimmed the ceiling lights. He clapped his hands gently. "All right, tonight is not about birthdays. It's about celebrating small things." He looked around the room. Did anyone do something kind this week? A boy raised his hand. "I gave my blanket to Tiz when she was cold." Everyone clapped softly. Jonah handed him a small glow stone. "Kindness deserves light." A girl stood up next. "I helped carry food trays for the kitchen bots." Another glow stone was given. One by one, children shared small good things. Helping, sharing, cleaning, being brave. It wasn't loud or wild, but it felt real. Then Jonah looked toward the door, and his heart warmed. Silka had entered the room. She held the little girl's hand, and though her steps were slow, she was walking forward, not hiding, not frozen, just quietly present. Jonah said nothing, but he gently pulled out a chair for her. She sat down with the others, eyes wide, hands folded. No one pushed her, no one mocked her. The room was quiet, soft, full of tiny sparks of peace. After a moment, Jonah reached into his bag and pulled out a small item wrapped in cloth. He placed it in front of Silka and said, "This is for someone who changed more than she knows." Silka looked up, surprised. She unwrapped the cloth slowly and found a small mirror pendant, shaped like a teardrop. On the back, carved in careful letters, was a single word, "Seen." Silka touched it gently. She didn't speak, but her eyes shimmered. Jonah whispered, "You matter, Silka." The children clapped softly again, not because they were told to, but because it felt right. Silka blinked quickly and looked down. No one had ever clapped for her. No one had ever made her feel real. She wore the pendant around her neck, tucking it inside her tunic like it was sacred. A weight lifted from her shoulders. and for the first time she sat tall. Not big, not loud. Just strong in silence. After the gathering, some children stayed back to help Jonah clean. Silka joined them, sweeping the corner quietly. Jonah didn't stop her. He just smiled and worked beside her. As they finished, Jonah turned off the main lights and lit one candle again. He looked around and said, "Even the smallest light can change the whole room." Silka glanced at the candle, then at the pendant she wore. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "Thank you," she said. Jonah looked at her and said, "You gave the others something too, Silka?" She looked confused. "What did I give?" He replied, "Hope." That night, Silka sat on the rooftop again. But this time she wasn't alone. The younger girl sat beside her, talking softly about her day. Silka listened, holding the paper flower in her hand. Below them, the education room glowed faintly with leftover light. From a distance, Director Malvek watched from his office window. He saw the candlelight, the children's laughter, and two small figures on the roof. He said nothing, but his antennae lowered gently, almost like a silent nod. And far above, in the dark sky, the stars blinked once more. But this time Silka didn't whisper a wish. She smiled because one had already come true. For days after the gathering in the education room, Silka felt like she was walking through a dream. The mirror pendant never left her neck. She touched it every time she felt unsure or scared. It reminded her that someone saw her, and someone cared. The other children started treating her differently. They no longer teased her or turned their backs. Some even sat beside her during meal times. And when she spoke, even if it was just a few words, they listened. It was strange at first. Silka didn't know how to act. She had been quiet and invisible for so long. But now, small things were changing. One morning, a small boy gave her a drawing. A picture of the cupcake with the candle. He said, "I drew this for your birthday." Silka stared at it, her heart suddenly tight in her chest. No one had ever drawn anything for her before. She whispered, "Thank you," and smiled. That simple smile made the boy run off happily. Jonah watched everything from a distance. He saw the way Silka moved now. Still small, still quiet, but no longer curled in on herself. She had begun to walk like someone who belonged. That afternoon, Jonah sat in the corner of the common room, fixing a broken toy bot. Silka walked up slowly, holding something in her hands. It was a folded piece of cloth, old and worn. She offered it to him, eyes shy but hopeful. Jonah took it carefully, unfolding it. Inside was a handmade bracelet made from broken thread and beads. It was uneven and small, but full of care. "For you," Silka said. "Because you gave me a day I never had." Jonah smiled warmly. "I'll wear it always," he said, tying it to his wrist. To him, it was more valuable than any medal or rank, because it came from a girl who had never believed in kindness until now. That evening, something even more surprising happened. The older caretaker, the one who once told Silka she had no birthday, walked up to Jonah. He scratched his head awkwardly and said, "You know, the children are different now." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "They talk more, smile more. Some even help clean." Jonah said nothing, just waited. The caretaker muttered, "Maybe those little lights of yours are doing something." Jonah smiled gently. "They're not my lights," he said. "They belong to the children." Meanwhile, a quiet plan was forming inside Silka's heart. She had never done anything for anyone before, but Jonah had shown her what it felt like to be remembered. Now, she wanted to do the same for someone else. She walked from room to room that week, listening, watching, learning. She noticed one girl always crying after lights out, another boy who never joined the games, and a small group who sat alone just like she used to. So Silka did something she never imagined she would do. She went to Jonah and whispered, Can I borrow some paper and glue? Jonah smiled and handed her what she needed. He didn't ask questions. He trusted her. For the next few evenings, Silka worked quietly in her corner. She made small paper stars, folded with care. She tied little notes to each one with words like, "You are seen. You matter. You are not alone." Then one night, she placed them gently on the beds of the loneliest children. When they woke up, some were confused, some smiled, and some cried quietly. They didn't know who had done it, but for the first time they felt noticed. Jonah knew who it was, of course. He walked up to Silka later and said, "You started a chain of kindness." Silka tilted her head. "What's a chain?" "It means when you do something kind, it doesn't stop. It keeps moving from one to another." Silka looked at her hands, then back at Jonah. "I like this chain," she said softly. He nodded. "So do I." That evening Jonah brought out something new. A small bell, old but shiny. He rang it once in the common room and said, "From now on, every time someone does something kind, we ring the bell to celebrate." He looked at Silka. "Would you like to ring it first?" Silka stepped forward slowly, her eyes wide. She touched the bell with both hands, then rang it gently. The soft sound echoed through the halls. Not loud, but bright. Everyone clapped, not because they were told to, but because they felt something warm in that sound. That night, as Silka sat by the window with the paper flower in her hand, she whispered, "This is not a dream anymore." And this time she believed it. Weeks passed, and the orphan facility on Draxus 7 began to feel different. It wasn't warmer, it wasn't cleaner, but something else had changed. The children. Laughter echoed down the halls more often. Whispers weren't full of gossip anymore, but full of ideas, of kindness, all because one girl had lit a spark. Silka had become something no one expected. A quiet leader. She still spoke softly, still avoided the spotlight, but others followed her example. She made simple paper gifts, shared her tray when someone was hungry, and most of all, she listened. Really listened, in a way no one had ever done for her. Jonah noticed everything. He saw the way Silka now walked through the halls with quiet confidence. The mirror pendant still around her neck, and sometimes a group of children trailing behind her. She didn't tell them what to do. She simply showed them how to be better. One day, Jonah received a message from Earth Command. It read, "Prepare for transfer in 7 days. Your time at Draxus 7 is ending." Jonah stared at the message for a long time. His heart felt heavy. He looked out the window at the dusty sky and whispered, "She doesn't need me now, but I don't want to leave." Still, orders were orders. He folded the message, placed it inside his bag, and sighed. He had 1 week left, and he wanted to make it count. The next morning, Jonah stood in front of the children and said, "I'll be leaving soon." The room went quiet. A few gasps, a few sad eyes. Even Silka looked down, her fingers tightening around her paper flower. "But before I go," Jonah said, smiling, "I want to leave something behind." He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a set of tiny bells. He handed one to Silka and said, "These bells belong to all of you now. Whenever someone does something kind, ring it." Silka nodded slowly. "We'll keep the chain going." Jonah placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I know you will," he said. "You're the heart of this place now." Later that day, Silka sat in the quiet room where she had first seen the cupcake. She stared at the empty table and whispered, "He made me feel real." Then she stood up and walked to the mirror on the wall. She looked at her reflection. Small, quiet, soft, but no longer broken. She touched the pendant around her neck and said, "I can do the same for others." Over the next few days, Silka worked harder than ever. She organized small story circles, made paper crowns for younger children, She even helped the grumpy kitchen bot improve its food settings. And every time someone smiled because of her, she rang one of the bells. The soft sound filled the orphanage like tiny songs of hope. On Jonah's last night, Silka gathered the children and brought them to the rooftop. The stars were out, bright and scattered like diamonds. Silka held something behind her back. She stepped forward and said, "We made something for you." Jonah looked surprised as Silka handed him a folded cloth. Inside it was a journal, made from old pages and stitched together with thread. On every page, the children had drawn pictures, written small thank you notes, and shared memories. Jonah turned the pages slowly, tears forming in his eyes. One drawing showed a human hand holding a candle. Another showed a tiny girl smiling with a paper star. One note simply said, "Because of you, I know I exist." Jonah knelt down, hugged the journal to his chest, and whispered, "Thank you." He looked at Silka. "This means more than you'll ever know." Silka stepped back and rang one of the bells. The others joined in. Soon, the rooftop echoed with the sound of dozens of tiny bells ringing in the night. Not loud, but powerful. The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter. And for the first time in his life, Jonah believed they were listening. The next morning, Jonah boarded the shuttle. As it lifted into the sky, Silka stood in the yard below, her hand raised in goodbye. She didn't cry, she smiled, full and strong, because he had given her strength, and now she was passing it on. Inside the shuttle, Jonah held the journal in his lap. He looked down at the dusty planet fading into the stars, and whispered, "One girl changed the rules." Days turned into weeks after Jonah's shuttle disappeared into the stars. And yet, something about the orphanage had stayed glowing. The metal walls were still cold, and the skies still dusty gray. But inside, hearts were warmer, eyes were brighter, and silence had turned into soft laughter. At the center of it all stood Silka, not as a leader by title, not as someone in charge, but as the heart that beat quietly in every corner. Every week, the children gathered in the education room. They shared small kindnesses, new stories, quiet victories, and after each one, someone would ring a bell. Just once, soft and sweet. One afternoon, while organizing art scraps for the younger kids, Silka heard a noise. A younger boy was sobbing near the water unit. His cup shattered on the floor. Without hesitation, Silka walked over, knelt down, and placed her paper flower in his hand. "It helped me once," she whispered. "It will help you too." The boy sniffled, looking at the flower like it held magic. Maybe it did, because it had come from someone who had once cried alone too. Later that night, as the stars appeared, Silka sat on the rooftop again. But this time she wasn't whispering to them. She was listening. The wind carried the soft sounds of the bells ringing below. She closed her eyes and smiled, not because she missed Jonah, though she did, but because she knew he was still with them, in every smile, every candle, every kind act. Then, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Director Malvek, the tall insectoid alien who once ignored her completely. He stepped forward slowly, carrying a small box. "I believe this belongs to you," he said gruffly, handing it over. Silka took the box with surprise, opening it carefully. Inside was a single cupcake, wrapped in starlight paper. Beside it sat a new glowing candle. Malvek shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know the exact date, but you should celebrate anyway." Silka looked up, eyes wide. He cleared his throat. "If you want." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she held the cupcake close. This wasn't from Jonah. This was from someone who had once called her invisible, and now was offering her a light. Silka whispered, "Thank you." Malvek nodded once, then turned and left. That night, Silka lit the candle herself. She sat beside it in the quiet and made a new wish, not to be seen, not to be remembered, but to keep spreading the chain, to be the reason someone else smiles. The next morning, something incredible happened. A shuttle landed unexpectedly, kicking up sand and wind. The children gathered at the windows, faces pressed against the glass. Was it another new worker? A supply drop? Silka stood at the back, calm. But then, her heart jumped. A familiar figure stepped out of the shuttle, worn boots, kind eyes, and a journal in hand. It was Jonah. The door burst open and the children ran out, shouting and laughing. Jonah knelt down as they surrounded him, hugging him tightly, and then he saw her. Silka stood a few steps behind the group, hands at her sides. She didn't run, but her eyes were full of light. Jonah smiled and walked toward her. He pulled something from his bag, a small sealed box. He handed it to her and said, "I promised I'd bring you another candle." Silka opened it slowly, revealing a music box, just like the old one. But this time, shaped like a glowing moon. She turned the key, and the tune played softly. It was the same melody from the night of her first birthday. She looked up at Jonah and said, "I didn't think you'd come back." "I couldn't stay away," he replied. "Not when I knew the light I left behind was still growing." Silka stepped forward and hugged him tightly. No words, just warmth. The other children clapped and rang their bells, not because it was planned, but because it felt right. That night, Jonah joined the circle in the education room again. Candles glowed, paper stars hung from the ceiling, and every child held a handmade gift. But at the center of it all sat Silka, no longer the forgotten girl, no longer invisible. She stood up and rang the bell gently. Then she said, "Let this not be the end of something, but the start of more. More kindness, more lights, more reasons to believe we all belong." And as the children cheered and the music box played, a tiny candle flickered in the window, the same one Jonah had lit months ago, still glowing, still warm, still reminding the stars that even the smallest light can change everything.